All right. So tonight we're welcoming Kody Thomas. He's the client care coordinator for Runway Recovery, one of our TAM heroes. He's the first line of defense against ACAs, and that's clients trying to leave the program early against clinical advice. Kody is the person who spends the most time with clients, so he has great information for us to consider and when we put these into our circumstances. So, Kody, we welcome you and we appreciate you being here, and the floor is all yours.
Thank you. It's great to be here. I appreciate it. So, I guess to start, my name's Kody. I am a recovering drug addict and alcoholic. I had a really mixed life growing up, and I feel it's important that I share this because of the premise of this group. Growing up, I had a mother who was very distant and wasn't naturally part of my life. Thankfully, I had two very loving grandparents, her parents, who did everything they could for me and raised me and gave me a really good life. However, at the age of 8, I was kind of uprooted from my loving grandparents, and my mother took me back into her custody and we moved. I remember at a very young age, I harbored a lot of resentments against my mother for this, for taking me away from this loving environment that I was in and bringing me into kind of this chaos, which now, that I'm older and have a better perspective on things and a better outlook on things, it wasn't really chaos. She was just trying to do the best she could with the best she knew how to do with. So with all that chaos that I felt at the time and not being able to be with my grandparents, who I felt like my grandmother was more of my mother than my mother was, and I never knew my father. So early on, I didn't want to be home. I didn't really have a relationship with my mother, and I did everything I could not to have a relationship with my mother, despite how hard she tried, despite everything she did, and how hard she went out of her way to be there for me. I just wasn't having it. At 11 years old, I joined a gang. I started dabbling in drugs and alcohol, nothing crazy, just a little bit of marijuana, drinking beers here and there. But that quickly escalated. I hear stories all the time about people who, for years, they used marijuana and alcohol, and for years, they just stayed dabbling in the small things that are kind of inconsequential. But for me, it was really fast. By the age 13, I was intravenously using heroin. That turned into fentanyl really fast. And the relationship I had with my mother was quickly destroyed. Not because of anything she did specifically, but because I had these mixed feelings about, oh, I was wronged by her as a child. So throughout the years, my mom harbored this kind of, how can I say, she felt this weight on her shoulders that she did something wrong, that it was all her fault, that she could have done something different to change my outcome and to change the way my life turned out. And for a long time, I kind of exploited that. I felt like once my mom actually voiced to me that she felt responsible for the outcome of my life, at every twist and turn, I would use that to my advantage. Oh, well, mom, if you did this for me, then maybe things will be different. Maybe you doing this can help me get out of my addiction. Maybe you doing this can help me become a better person. When in all reality, it was just me exploiting the weakness that she presented. So, for a very, very long time, that was the only relationship I had with my mother. It was also the only relationship I had with my grandmother. My grandmother felt that she didn't do something right, or there was something more she could have done. And she carried the burden of my struggles and my addiction throughout her entire life. I'll be 33 years old in about 1 month. So from the age 11 pretty much to the age of 31, my life was in shambles. I was in and out of California State Prison. I was in and out of juvenile detention centers. I was never in and out of drug treatment because I just never wanted to get sober. I liked the life I was living. I enjoyed it. And I think moreover, I knew how to live that life and it was comfortable for me. What was scary for me was trying to get a job because that was something I've never attempted before. What was scary for me was paying bills because that was something I've never attempted before. So I was comfortable being in the life that I knew how to live. Until, that changed here recently. I don't want to get into too much of my backstory because I feel like that's not necessarily important. How much drugs I used, how much alcohol I drank. What's important is that there is hope out there. I witnessed my mom and my grandmother both struggle their entire life with feeling like they did something wrong, feeling like it was somehow their fault. And knowing what I know today, I know that that's not the case. Maybe early on, there is some type of childhood trauma involved. Maybe. I'm not discounting it. However, what I do know is that at a certain time, the choices were mine to make. Nobody could have pushed me onto that path, and nobody could have helped me off of that path either until I was ready to come off of that path. Knowing that today gives me a lot of peace because I'm able to convey that to my mother and my grandmother who just recently passed, which I'll get a little more into here in a bit. But I'm able to convey that to them today. And in speaking with my mother today and letting her know that my life and the outcome of my life was by no means her fault. Even though we don't have the best relationship still to this day, I still know that gives her some peace of mind. I still know it's weighed heavy on her all these years. And I'm truly blessed today because not only am I a grateful recovering drug addict and alcoholic, but I get to work in drug treatment today. I get to work at the addiction center that saved my life. And like Terry said, being on the front lines, being the staff here that has the most face time with the clients, I deal with people, from all different walks of life. People that I can relate to, people that I can't relate to, and people I learn how to relate to. And it's a struggle. It's coming to an environment to try to get sober and do away with everything you thought you knew about yourself is hard. It's really hard. I didn't really have any family that were there for me when I got sober, but I do know that throughout my addiction, whenever my mother or my grandmother or my family in general would try to impress treatment upon me, I would only push against it that much harder because I wasn't ready. I wasn't ready to change my life. I wasn't ready to get sober, and I wasn't ready to admit that I didn't really enjoy what I was doing at the time. At the time, I believed that I was on the best course of action for my life because it's what I knew how to do. And that experience uniquely qualifies me today to work in the field that I work in. A lot of the people that come through here struggle with the same feelings that I went through my entire life. Insecurities, not feeling good enough. I remember throughout my entire addiction when I would exploit what my mother and grandmother, their feelings, when I would exploit their feelings about, oh, I wasn't able to do enough for Kody, or what could I have done differently. I encounter that daily here of people who share with me, that they believe their families may be too enabling or their families aren't there enough for them. And it's cool to be able to sit down and work through these issues with people because I feel like I have a unique experience when it comes to that. Knowing what I know today and doing the work that I've done proves to me that, my family wasn't in the wrong. My family didn't not do enough. I chose what I wanted to do. And I don't know any simpler way to put it. The life that I lived is the life I wanted to live. Now, today, I can make amends to my family, a living amends, and show them that it was no fault of theirs. I was able to make it out of what I was going through. And here I am today, a better person, able to help people going through the same thing. People do try to leave treatment a lot for all different types of reasons. But at the end of the day, what I see the commonality is between the people who want to leave, it's always fear. They fear that they can't do this. Or that coupled with, I fear letting my family down. Even though we've all pushed our families so far away from us and sometimes make them think that they're the problem, they still harbor that base fear of, I don't want to let my mother down. I don't want to break her heart again. I don't want to let my grandma down. I don't want to let my sister down or my kids down or whoever it may be. And when I see that in other people, it reminds me of, for lack of better words, it reminds me of how effed up I was. Because I would make my family believe that it was their fault. Because if I made them believe it was my fault, then a small part of me believed that it was their fault. And as long as it was anybody's fault but my own, I felt a little bit better about myself. With everything that was going on in my life, with all the crime I was committing, with all the wreckage I was leaving in my wake, with all the people I was hurting, it made me feel just a little bit better about myself because I didn't have to own everything that was going on in my life. And it's a lot, it's still a lot. It makes me emotional talking about it right now. My grandfather and my grandmother were the closest people to me in my life. near the end of my using, my grandfather passed away. And throughout all of my prison terms, throughout all of the things that I've done throughout my life, my grandfather was always there for me. As long as I admitted that I made a mistake and was willing to attempt to move past it, he was there for me. Even though I was never really willing, even though I just said I was willing because I wanted a relationship with my grandfather, he was still there for me. And when his time came and his card was called and he was on his deathbed, I was the only person in the world that he was asking for. And I wasn't there because I was too busy using drugs and not taking ownership for my actions. So my grandfather passed. My grandmother sat there with my dying grandfather while the one person in the world that he wanted there wasn't there. I got sober shortly after. I've been sober 18 months, just a few days ago. And recently, my grandmother came down ill. She was 84 years old. She's had multiple heart attacks. She fell. One of the stents that she had in her heart ruptured. To make a long story short, she was in the hospital, and there was a surgery they could have attempted to save her life. I went to the hospital to see her, and she told me, she goes, Kody, I don't want to have the surgery. And keep in mind, all these things, I haven't detailed anything too much, but I have said that I put them through hell, literal hell, not knowing if I was alive. I've been shot multiple times too, by the way. 4 times I've been shot. And my grandparents and my mom never found out from me. They found out from the news, seeing my face on KCAL 9 or whatever news channel they watch. Shot again, life-threatening injuries in the hospital. So my entire life, they never knew if I was alive if I didn't contact them. They never knew if I was out there hurting people. They never knew what I was doing. So I put them through a lot. And I got to sit there with my grandmother very, very recently, in the last few months. And she looked me in the eyes and told me, Kody, I don't want to have another surgery. I don't want to be taken care of by anyone. I don't want to be in a hospice. I don't want to do that. She said, I can finally die happy knowing you got your life together. And that was a lot. It was a lot. I feel like my entire life, that's the one thing I've been striving for, because words were never enough to convey to my grandmother how sorry I was, to convey to my family that it was never their fault, that it was all on me. But in that moment, words weren't necessary, because my grandma saw with my actions, through everything that I've been through, that the hope that she held for me, it mattered, because I was able to make it out the other side. And here I am. Grandmother passed away, didn't get high, didn't use. And I feel like my grandmother died finally being able to do away with those worries about, did I not do something right for Kody? Is there something more I could have done? And carrying that burden throughout her entire life. My changing finally showed my grandmother that it wasn't her fault. And that if I made it, anybody else can. There's other people in my family that struggle with addiction as well. I have an aunt who's in a bad place right now because my little cousin is experimenting, and my aunt constantly turns to me for hope, to make it through nights sometimes, for me to reassure her, because if I did it, he can do it. So having gone through all that and being in the position I am today, I want you guys to know there is hope. There is 100% hope, but it's not necessarily hope on the terms that you may want. It's not hope now because we want it now. It's hope that will find its way through eventually, but you have to be patient and try not to blame yourselves. I, in turn, also blame myself for a long time. For my grandfather's death, for not being there, for the amounts of stress that I caused my grandmother, just for all these things that I know weren't my fault, but because I failed to take responsibility for things earlier in life, I felt like now I had to take these responsibilities. And that was almost as toxic as my grandmother thinking there was something more she could have done. But I'm here today. I'm here today as an example that no matter how hard life gets, no matter how far down that path you go, there is hope. There is light at the end of the tunnel. And not only am I here today, alive and well and breathing, but I'm employable today. I'm employed. I'm on my way to becoming a certified alcohol and drug counselor through the state of California. I have things today that I never thought I'd have. I have bills that are in my name, for one. I have an apartment. I just have things that normal people have. Things that I never thought I would have for myself, because I resigned myself to the life that I was living. And my family that's still around, and even my grandmother before she passed, I've never seen my grandmother so proud. Her dying words being to me, I can finally pass on now that you've got your life together. That's a lot. That shows me that my grandmother did hold out hope for me my entire life, and it did count for something. So she talked about in the beginning my title here at the Runway Recovery, and kind of highlighted that. So I feel like I should speak a little more on that. I don't know where we are on time. If you have to interrupt me, go ahead.
No, you're good, Kody. Go ahead.
Okay, thank you. So, here I've had the privilege of not only dealing with clients and helping clients out, but I've had a lot of family interaction too. And I don't want to say it's funny, but it's ironic, I would say, because a lot of the times the family interactions that I have reminds me so much of my own family dynamic, because I see in these clients that come through here myself, and I see in their families what I failed to see in my family growing up, but I see now. You know, I see the families who all they want is their child or their loved one or their niece or their nephew to get help and get better. And I see the client almost exasperated at the amount of help they're trying to provide. You know, like, okay, just leave me alone. Like, okay, I'll figure it out. I'll figure it out. And me having gone through all of those exact circumstances, when the time's right, I get the opportunity to kind of redirect things and try to break that down to like wherever it stems from and try to work through it. And it's crazy because there are some clients that myself and staff members as a whole here have kept in touch with after leaving. And if I'm being totally honest, I don't think I've ever experienced a better feeling than a client from the past reaching out, or a client's family from the past reaching out and thanking us and what we do here because of the track that they're on. You know, Sorry, talking about the whole thing with my grandmother and grandfather was kind of unexpected and made me a little emotional. So, I love what I do today because it's a constant reminder of where I'll be if I take my foot off the pedal. But it's also an opportunity to help people like myself who don't necessarily have help from anywhere else. A lot of the people that come through here are so resistant to help. They almost feel forced into these situations, which makes it that much harder to go through with. If I feel forced into a situation, I'm not going to put my best foot forward. you know, but myself and all of my coworkers who have gone through the same life struggles, we're all in unique positions to be able to take that client, sit them down, and really understand what they're going through because we've gone through it ourselves. And 9 times out of 10, I can't speak for numbers directly, but in my experience, 9 times out of 10, the people I see with those problems that come through treatment and actually put their best foot forward, they do make it out the other side. Not unscathed, maybe, but they make it out the other side. So I think it's just a matter of everyone's ready when they're ready, and nobody can force that on them. Today, though, I get to plant seeds, right? I get to put ideas in people's heads. I get to show them through my experience and through my life story that it is possible. It's not a one off. It's not, you know, it's easy to come into the recovery world and see the people with 20 years sober, 30 years sober, and that dissuades us. It's really hard to look at 20 years later. Oh, okay, I'm going to be that guy with 20 years sober. But me, I have a very short amount of sobriety. 18 months is something that I'm very grateful for, but relatively it's not that long. So when people come in here and I can share my story with them, 18 months is a lot more achievable than 20 years. Not to mention the Runway Recovery is the facility that I got sober at. So I have that unique experience as well. Not only do I understand treatment, not only am I able to help them because I've been through it, but I can help them because I slept in this exact facility. Sometimes I slept in the exact bed that they're sleeping in. You know, it just brings me a lot of joy to be able to give back in that aspect, because throughout my whole life, all I've done was take. All I've done was hurt my family and hurt everyone around me. I also am a father. I have 4 kids, and I was never there for my kids. Never. If I'm being completely honest, my kids were taken away from me because of my gang activity, because of my criminal lifestyle. I was deemed a detriment to my kids' well being. And when the kids were taken away, I was happy. And not because, okay, they're in a better place. My lifestyle is very unhealthy. No, I was happy because they were a hindrance to my drug using and my gang activity. And when I think about that today, it embarrasses me. But I have to know my truth if I want to grow. If I deny that truth, then there's no room for growth. I bring this up because, today and maybe for the past 6 months, I've been able to be an active part of my kids' lives. And I always swore to myself, when my mom wasn't present for the first years of my life, I always swore to myself that I would never be that parent who's not present. Never would I be that parent. And I turned out to be that exact parent, if not 100 times worse. But today I get to be there for them. Today I get to show them that, whatever struggles they go through, whatever it may be, I'm a shining example of you can make it out of that. Not to just my grandmother, not to just my mother, not to just the clients here, but to my own children. And I feel like that's on a whole nother level. For me to be able to get my life together and be there for my children in the capacity that the courts allow me means a lot to me. And that wouldn't be possible, if it wasn't for the work that I put in. If it wasn't for me sincerely making the choice to turn my life around, which came very abruptly. It wasn't something that was planned out. It wasn't something I put any thought into. For the first time in my life, despite my mother's, my grandmother's, my aunts and uncles, the mother of my kids, despite all of their best interest in my well-being, despite everything they would always try to do for me, despite what lengths they went to try to help me, I was never ready. Until one day, for the first and only time in my life, I was struggling with passive suicidal ideation. I didn't want to kill myself. I didn't have a plan. But I remember being completely okay with dying in that exact moment. Reflecting on that is hard too, that I fell so far down the path. I myself used to think very highly of myself when I was using and when I was acclimated in the criminal street gang and when I was doing all the things I was doing, as I think a lot of people like me do, right? We're not liars and we have honor and we have integrity. So for me to struggle with suicidal ideation was really hard. Thanks to a very small pool of people that are still in my life today, I was able to find my way into drug treatment. I was able to work through all the wreckage of my past. And now today, my grandmother having died with me being on good terms with her, you know, me and my mother aren't on the best of terms, but that's a whole nother story. My mom struggles with her own problems. She's actively an alcoholic and is going through her own things right now. But if it wasn't for that, our relationship would be amazing. I have conveyed to my mother recently, and many a time in the past 18 months, that nothing that went on in my childhood or my teenage years or even my adult life was any fault of her own. And I've been able to convey this to my entire family. And I think the best part about it is not necessarily my conveying it, but watching them before my eyes accept it as truth and finally let go of those resentments that they had against themselves for not doing something for me or not being there for me. How much more time do we have, Terry?
Oh, well, do you have some more? We can definitely go on. I have some questions for you.
Okay, could we maybe get into questions? I just am at work right now,
Uh-huh.
so I do have to get back to work soon. I was allowed to take this time out to do this, though.
Oh, okay. Okay, so here's a question for you. It's hard to step back from our child, but do you recommend we give space once they enter recovery? Many of us have a tendency to hover. What's your thoughts on that?
I mean, okay, so I didn't have family when I was in recovery, when I entered into treatment. However, I do know it depends on the dynamic of your relationship, if you want my advice. How can I say this? Give me 1 second. So, there's a fine line between being there and providing support and enabling, right? I know for a long time, so perfect example. Throughout a lot of my prison time, my grandparents were there for me financially. They were there for me emotionally. They were just there as support. And a lot of the times I would tell my grandparents whatever they wanted to hear so they would financially support me while I was in prison and couldn't support myself. So it's just a fine line. I recommend giving space, yeah, especially if you trust the treatment center that they're at. Let them work through their stuff. Let the treatment center staff do their job. There's ROIs that can be signed, releases of information, so that way the staff can speak to the family. But I know for me, and I can only speak on my own experience, I know when it came to my recovery, I had to distance myself from everything and everyone and just work through it on my own. Even the mother of my children, her being involved was very, very limited. If that helps, I don't know if that answer helps at all, but
Yeah, it does. It does. And so much of what you said, Kody, I personally can relate to because of my son's close to your age. And what you shared with us is just phenomenal. I'm super proud of you and
thank you.
so glad that you're here and able to help other people. And one of the questions that I had too was, as moms, we all struggle, of course, and we're
Mm-hmm.
always trying to figure out, what do we do now? What do we do next? How can I this? How can I that? And it's a realization to me in listening to you and others that speak, it's the same thing on both sides.
Mm-hmm.
And so we're both teetering on the same worries. The addiction side is worried about, a whole different thing, but their mind is filled with all these obstacles and confusing thoughts. And how do I move forward? And moms are doing the same thing. And it's really nice to hear that you came out of it, and
Mm-hmm.
that is truly a blessing. And I think that's what we all hope for all of our loved ones. So we appreciate that for sure.
Of course, you're welcome. Thank you.
And Sue also said, thank you, Kody. I love what you said about taking responsibility for what you were doing, even if there may have been some issues with your life as a youth. Also, thank you for reaching back to help others and also for admitting you have exploited weaknesses in those that loved you. I'm not sure I've ever heard that said before by anyone we've spoken to, and that brings a little comfort to those of us who blame ourselves. And I'm sorry for the pain that you had to live with today, and namely the passing of your grandfather. Okay.
Thank
And
you.
so we just wanted to recognize that. And we appreciate you so much. And it helps us to kind of to stay in the forefront of this as we go through these interviews and listen to each person tell their story, because it's filled with hope in so many different ways. And it just kind of keeps us on the same path, that while it's hard for us, it's super hard for those that are trying to fight it. And so we definitely appreciate you, especially giving us your time. I'm glad they gave you the time off to come speak with us.
Of course, yeah. I was excited to.
Well, we appreciate it so much, Kody, and thank you for being here, and keep doing what you're doing. You're doing great things.
Thank you. Thank you.
All right. Thank you, Kody.
You're welcome. You guys have a good day.
You too.